Hey comrades, so part 3 here of the Phoenix Saga. We're going to wrap up with mostly just Uncanny X-Men and Classic X-Men stuff. No more side stories and side trips or whatever. This is all just focusing on the Phoenix and Cyclops being a part of the main X-Men after second gen and what we're doing there. So go ahead, like, subscribe, comment, and we'll get started. We're going to start with Classic X-Men number 17, which is Uncanny X-Men number 11. And this picks up right after the Marvel team up with Spider-Man and Havoc, where Beast is in. We get a little background on Beast, and then he lands at a circus, and he's traced the X-Men here, and he sees that they're all part of the show. And Banshee's a carnival barker, and he sees Wolverine chained up, and he sees posters for the rest of them, and he's very confused. And we get a little backstory where Lorna had called him, remember when Havoc went missing, and so he decided he was going to take a break from the Avengers and go check it out. And this is when Thor went to meet up with Spider-Man and beat up the living monolith. But when he got to the manor, it looked like everyone just disappeared, like mid-dinner, and that Professor X and Alondra were gone, and he really hasn't been keeping in touch with them very well. So he goes and sees the show. He sees Jean and Cyclops performing some tricks in the air, and then he goes to talk to Jean, and she freaks out. Cyclops comes over to beat him up, and they kind of get into a fight, and what do you call them? The Carnies are all chasing Beast around, and finally he gets hit in the back of the head by Colossus. And we see Wolverine. Wolverine is clearly not under whatever spell the rest of them are on. And you may ask, who's doing this thing to the X-Men? And it's our old friend Mesmero. Now, if you've forgotten Mesmero, that's okay. He's from like X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, like, golly, 40-something. He was a henchman of Magneto, but it was like Android Magneto, I think, at the time. Anyway, he mesmerizes people and gets them to do things. But Wolverine, because of his animal instincts and everything, he's not fooled. And so he breaks free. He finds out where people are. He goes in and assaults Jean Grey, like physically, like slaps the shit out of her. So she wakes up, and she's like, oh shit, we were under Mesmero's spell. And then she wakes everybody else up. Meanwhile, Beast is resisting Mesmero, but he's trying real hard, but he finally succumbs. While the rest of the X-Men are beating up all the Carnies because Jean Grey has freed them. Once they get to Mesmero, they are surprised because he just collapses over the Beast, and they see a shadow behind him, and they're like, oh shit, because it's Magneto and he's ready for revenge, which he swore to do in issue 12, I think, of Classic X-Men. So the side story is just how Mesmero was bragging to Beast earlier on in the issue about how he captured Jean, and then he was able to use Jean to capture everybody else. And so we get that. So we see him like run up on Jean as she's wandering around New York, and he goes back to his hotel, and he has her like dressed up in like a very sexy outfit, and he's clearly going to rape her. But then whenever he tries to touch her, the Phoenix comes out and like assaults him. And so he's like, shit, okay, well, I can look, but I can't touch. That's fine. So then he takes Jean to the X Manor, and one by one, he mesmerizes all the X-Men, except Wolverine, who resists. So then Mesmero orders the X-Men to fight Wolverine, which they do. And they fight and fight and fight and fight. And eventually, Mesmero gets bored, and he's like, all right, everyone, take a nap. And Wolverine's like, all right, I resisted. I'll be okay. And then he collapses from exhaustion, right? Because he's fighting all the X-Men for like however long. Mesmero's trying to figure out what to do, and he's pissed off. He's throwing stuff around, kicking tables over, and then he sees a picture of Kurt at a circus, and he's like, oh, I got a good idea. So he dresses everybody up and takes them to the circus, and that's the prologue to this issue. Magneto. So episode Classic X-Men 18, 112, Uncanny X-Men. We have a parlay. So Magneto and the X-Men sit and chit-chat for a bit. Everyone's thinking about how dangerous Magneto is. Magneto's concerned because he doesn't sure he has his fully recovered with his powers. Nightcrawler goes to see if Magneto has some sort of trick up his sleeve outside the little room that they're in, and they realize that they are flying through the sky in this like carny kind of wagon thingy. At this point, Magneto recalls that he tracked the X-Men down because he went to go see what was going on at the X-Mansion, and no one was there, and he was concerned. But then Beast showed up, so he followed him all the way to the carnival, and here he saw Mesmero. And if you remember, Mesmero was working for Android Magneto, not actual Magneto. And so Magneto punished him by knocking him out in a single blast. And then at this point, going back to the present, he tosses him out the window. But he uses his magnetic power to slowly drop him into like the Amazon rainforest, where the Brazilian Air Force or somebody sees him and goes to like rescue Mesmero. Magneto then takes the cart and delves it into Antarctica, into like a volcano, and down to his base. He has this ridiculous looking underground base that's powered by the magma underneath the earth. At this point, the X-Men, Magneto breaks the cart, and the X-Men begin the battle. So they fight and fight and fight. But as usual with Magneto, they are not doing too well. They get beat up pretty bad. Everyone has their like one-on-one fights. Cyclops reminisces that if they could just fight as a team, they would probably do a lot better. But because they don't, they're going to lose. At this point, the last man up is Jean Grey, and she uses her Phoenix powers. But Magneto's able to like kind of withstand the destruction enough till she tires out. At this point, Wolverine goes to stab him in the back, misses, and then punches himself out. And Magneto's like, "Oh, I have won." The X-Men, which includes Beast at this point, are all now they all wake up and they're all in these chairs. They're strapped down. They can't move. And Magneto introduces them to Mother, who is this android lady who is going to take care of them. And he tells them he's not going to kill them because he wants revenge. And revenge for turning him into a baby is that they all are going to be treated like 6-month-olds, where they can't use their powers and they can't get up. And she's going to like feed them and change them and take care of them. And they're all like, "Oh no, this is terrible." So the B story is Jean Grey hanging out in the woods by herself, and she's being stalked by Wolverine, of course, who came out to just kind of see how she was. After he leaps at her with the knife, she transforms into Phoenix. They have a conversation. Banshee's also there, and then they're trying to chat with her just about how she feels and about becoming the Phoenix and how she feels kind of adrift and how she's got friends and she needs to rely on them. The art in here is interesting for some of these side sections because Banshee looks like he's 12. And he's the second oldest or third oldest person. He might be as old as Professor X. He's like the second or third oldest person on the team. Like he's in his like 40s. Wolverine, of course, is like over 100 years old, and then Professor X is 40s, 50s. He's really not that old, even though he's bald, from what I remember. So then Jean shows them that she's got control of her powers and that she's doing great by moving little stuff and then lifting like a whole lake out of the ground. And that's when Nightcrawler shows up and says, "Boo!" And then Jean Grey loses her focus for a second and releases the water, and it hits everybody and drags them in. And then she's able to recover, and they have like a nice little chat about that. She's like, "All right, well, let me make you guys camping dinner." The end. So Magneto spends the first bit of Uncanny or Classical X-Men number 19, Uncanny X-Men number 113. I want to go ahead and say, which is correct. And he's beating the shit out of people in Australia, New Zealand. Why? Because fuck humanity. That's why. We flip over to Charles Xavier, who's on his little vacay with Lilandria in the Cyclades Islands off of Kyranos, which is like Greece. Anyway, he's like, "Oh, I can't feel the X-Men. Something must be wrong." And Lander's like, "Nah, they're probably fine." Wrong. Going back to the underground base, we see everybody struggling against the restraints, and we see the nanny robot treating them like children, and Wolverine's having like the real hardest of all times. He's trying to break free. And then we get Aurora Monroe, that is Storm, being badass as usual and being the best X-Men by far. She, if you have forgotten, she used to be a thief, one of the best thieves in Cairo, and she was trained at a young age. She also makes some comment about having the motor function of like a 6-year-old at the 6-month age, which is completely, which is the most unrealistic part about this entire series so far, as someone who has multiple children. There's no 6-month-old walking around being able to manipulate things, but whatever. And the reason that's important is because they're all sedated at a level where they're like 6 months old. Or being bound, right? So anyway, so Aurora drops her headband, and inside is some lockpicks, and then she's able to use her mouth to start working on the lockpick, and she has some recall about being taught how to escape anything and all that good stuff. And then she drops the pin right before she's able to unlock herself. And the nanny comes in, sees that she dropped her headband, puts it back on, and we see Aurora crying. We then go up to Asteroid M, which is an asteroid in space that Magneto created. I think way back in like an early X-Men. Anyway, he's up there talking about how his powers are way better than they used to be, and we get him just like shaving and taking a shower and just thinking about shit. And then he notices there's an alarm for the underground base, so he heads over there, and it's dark, and the nanny's just walking around in circles, and then he gets jumped by everybody in the X-Men, because Aurora, she failed that first attempt, but she made her second attempt, and they got out. And so they're blasting him from every angle in the dark, and they're not giving him a moment to breathe. And for the first time ever, which is why this issue is so important, the X-Men are fighting under Cyclops' leadership as a team, and because of that, they're beating the shit out of Magneto. Unfortunately for the X-Men, when Phoenix did one of her blasts, it cracked open the fortress, and now it's being filled with lava. And so the X-Men are trying to escape while the whole thing's collapsing, and Magneto barely is able to make it out right before there's a huge explosion, and he's like, well, fuck the X-Men, at least I'm alive, and he takes off. But then Phoenix comes bursting out with Beast right before she collapses in Antarctica in the snow, followed by Beast, who picks her up to carry her, and then he also passes out. Dun, dun, dun. So the Beast story follows Magneto. He was working for the U.S. government, taking out Nazis around the world after he all the sad stuff that happened the last time when Magda and his daughter was killed in the fire, and then Magda and all that stuff. So he breaks into like a Nazi base. This is like years after the war, destroys a bunch of stuff, captures this guy, finds out all this information. He realizes he still is trying to figure out how to use his powers correctly because he's getting like these terrible migraine headaches from like overexerting himself. But then he calls in to Control and tells him that all that stuff's happening, and then he meets this beautiful girl, Isabella, who wants to boink him, and he's like, no, I can't do that right now. Every time I look at you, I think of my dead wife and daughter, and it makes me sad. And then she's like, well, let me massage you. So she starts massaging him, and then she gets her throat slit by Control. Dun, dun, dun. Betrayal. So apparently that Nazi guy he caught was actually working for the U.S. because the U.S. hired Nazis after World War II, if you weren't paying attention to real life. And then they have a conversation about that. Magneto's like, you're all a bunch of assholes. And so he uses his magnetic powers against this guy. But unfortunately for him, the guy had some sort of like vest made that counters his magnetic powers. And they're about to shoot Magneto to death when he's like, fuck your vest. It just blasts like the whole penthouse apart. And he's like, I'm done with you humans. And then he like kills everybody and throws the guy off like a building. And is like, I'm done. I, Magneto, am bored. So we catch up with Beast and Jean struggling through the Antarctic, mostly Beast carrying Jean, and eventually he sees a helicopter, like a Navy helicopter in the sky, so he like shakes Jean real hard, like kind of smacks her a little bit. So she wakes up and uses the Phoenix Force, and she's trying to dig down into the volcano. Beast stops her, she's crying, having a real hard time, but the helicopter picks him up. Meanwhile, time passes, and the rest of the X-Men come blasting out of a mountain wall to find themselves in the Savage Land. Sweet. And then we get a recap. So as the lava's coming in, they find the little passageway. They head down the passageway, and Cyclops starts blasting through the rock, and with Banshee and Colossus and Wolverine. Meanwhile, Storm is using all her power to like waylay the lava and to kind of like get it to freeze up. Back to the present, they're flying around, checking out what's going on, and Banshee gets picked up by a giant pterodon. And Storm can't fly, and Cyclops doesn't feel like he can hit him well enough, but Colossus takes Wolverine and tosses him up, and Wolverine kills the shit out of that thing real good. Like, real good. And falls. So Banshee is taken care of by Aurora, and at this point we see a shady figure who's clearly Sauron or Karl Lycos, watching the X-Men and being like, oh, Cyclops, I recognize you even with your new costume. The rest of the X-Men catch up to Wolverine. He's just chilling on this pterodon being like, sweet. Banshee and Storm mentioned they saw a village, and they head out that way. Continuing forth with Beast and Jean Grey, we're at a Navy outpost in Antarctica, and he's able to reach out to Captain America and apologize for just taking off. Captain America is Captain America, so he's like, no problem, brother. He then goes and talks to Jean, and she has a good cry, and he has a good cry, and they cry it out. They then fly back, like, I think it was like a week or two later. Beast finally meets Lilandria, and they kind of go off to do their own thing, while Jean goes in to tell the professor that the X-Men are dead. And part of the issue with them not being able to track him down, if we remember, is that Magneto kind of messed up the magnetic pool in the Earth, so that telepathy was just not going to work that well. So that's why they can't really track him down. Meanwhile, in the village where they're all hanging out now, we see like shirtless Sean, shirtless Cyclops. We see Aurora in a sexy outfit. Cyclops, it's been long enough that Cyclops has a sweet-ass beard, which may seem silly, but it's actually very important. Aurora goes off to swim, and Sean goes off to do whatever he's going to do. Cyclops is sitting by a river, and he's shaving, and he shaves down to a mustache. And then when he looks in the river, he's like, is that Corsair? And then he's like, oh, my head. And he starts to remember Corsair, or his father, I can't remember his first name, and his mother, when everything happened. And he's like, oh, the guy had a Nebraskan accent. I'm from Nebraska, all this kind of stuff. And then Aurora shows up, and he's like, oh, shoot, I lost it. And Cyclops is having a real hard time with he's like mourned for Beast much more than he mourned for Jean Grey, because he still feels like he lost Jean Grey when she became the Phoenix, which is a lot of foreshadowing into what we'll get to in the future. But it was kind of hinted at in the classic version anyway, that like this woman who is presenting herself as Jean Grey the Phoenix is just the Phoenix, and that the actual Jean Grey is somewhere else. So that's going to be a much bigger deal at another point. But for now, we continue forward. Scott's like, oh, my head, I gotta figure out what's going on, and he's like sad and kind of worried, and trying to figure out what Jean means to him. Colossus is with some local babe, a frail, as Wolverine likes to say it, and he's got his shirt. Everyone's got their shirt off, all the men. Colossus invites Wolverine to come with them, but Wolverine's like, nah, and he has a picture of Jean Grey that he kept, and he's like, this is the only woman I ever loved, which is a lie, but whatever. Because there's Mariko, which we'll get to eventually. And he's super sad eponymous about that. He's fixing up his uniform. So at this point, the interesting thing is no one's wearing their uniforms. They're all wearing these like half uniforms or like local garb. Aurora swims and feels great and says, I like it here. It's like being back in Africa and all this stuff. And then she gets assaulted, and there's lightning and screaming. And then with the X-Men all like converge on what's going on. And Cyclops is wearing his full unaltered like uniform. So is Nightcrawler, and so is Wolverine. So it doesn't match like the rest of the issue at all. But Sean, Scott, Kurt, and Wolverine. I don't think he's been. Oh, he's in the classic version. He's been named Logan. So Logan run up to where Aurora is, and they see Sauron. Yes, he's back, and he's like, "I have killed her, and I will kill you. I am evil incarnate." Going to the B plot. The B plot is bizarre. There's absolutely no other way to put it. What's going on in the B plot is that we have Storm, and she's at a wedding, and everyone's there, and she's super excited, and then zombies. And then she's like, then she like wakes up from her dream, and she's in a cabin, and it's also, she sees this guy named Jack, and he's also a zombie, and he goes to kill her, and then he keeps seeing this man. She wakes up, she's on vacation in somewhere, and she meets this old woman who's sad. Her husband worked at a plant on this island doing metal processing or something, and he died, and so they sent her to this resort and paid insurance and kind of took care of her, but she was never able to see her husband's body. So Aurora goes to kind of see what's going on, meets with the president of the company, just because, I guess. And while she's there, she sees Jack, and Jack from her dream, and also, or from the nightmare, but also Jack, the husband of the lady, who's now like a zombie. And she's like, the fuck? And so then the owner of the corporation or whatever is like, get her! And so she transforms into her costume and flies out of there. And then somehow she ends up in a cabin. It's like the same cabin from her dreams, and there's all these zombies attacking her. And then she uses lightning, and then the guy's like, get him! And then she kills like everybody. She says this whole thing about not killing humans, but since these guys are like already dead, she's not really doing anything wrong. And so I don't know if she killed him too, but he was like standing there, and then everyone's dead. And then that's the end. So okay. The Savage Land, good stuff. So Sauron here in issue, we pick up in issue 21 Classic X-Men and 117 for Uncanny X-Men. The X-Men are about to fight Sauron, and Wolverine is not going to have any part of what he did to Aurora. But Cyclops tries to stop him because, dun dun dun, if you remember, Sauron has the ability to hypnotize. So he hypnotizes Wolverine, so he thinks his friends are his enemies. So he goes to attack, and Cyclops blasts him real good. Then Banshee goes up and starts beating the shit out of him. Meanwhile, Nightcrawler sticks around to help Wolverine and Aurora out while Cyclops goes to help Banshee out. And eventually, Wolverine wakes up, knocks Nightcrawler out, and Cyclops has to blast him again. Then Sauron comes to get Cyclops, and their powers combined, as in Cyclops and Banshee blast him together. Meanwhile, Lycos is running out of energy as Sauron, and so he goes back to where they originally started and finds Colossus trying to help Aurora. He tries to grab him, but Colossus transforms into iron, which blasts him far away. So then Wolverine comes to beat the shit out of him, and he's back to Carl Lycos. And right before Wolverine's about to end this shit, Khazar shows up. That's right, our old friend Khazar with his friend Zabu. We have some back and forth with them before we switch back over to Westchester County, where Jean Grey is packing up all her stuff from the X-Mansion and being sad and wishing that the power of Phoenix had saved the universe, but it couldn't save the one she loved. And then she has some naughty thoughts. Not really naughty, but she has some she realizes she can bust into anybody's mind, and that she could bust into Professor X and learn all his secrets and do everything. And same thing with the laundry. And then she feels guilty about it, and she feels she still has this kind of like breaker turned off in her brain, so she can't use her unlimited power. But she needs to figure out how to train better, and she feels bad about spying on Professor X, and so doesn't want to ask him for help. And she's kind of in a sorry state. Back to the Savage Land, we get a little bit of talk about Carlycos, like what happened to him after he fell down into the Savage Land way back in something Uncanny X-Men, like 60 something. Anyway, he got here and he started living off the land as an absorbing energy from small creatures and like coming to terms with all the bad choices he made, and he kind of became a good guy. But then one day while wandering around, he found this crazy looking mountain and this lunatic woman named Zaladane, and what she does is she takes this poor guy, something, and turns him into the Petrified Man. Now, you may ask what the Petrified Man is. Well, the Petrified Man is some sort of god creature here. She takes him to this crazy alien city that's sitting out in the swamps, and he literally just looks at it, and the whole thing disappears through like a dimension. While that's going on, Kazar is like he's flying around on a flying shark to attack the city of Sheeners. But then he gets transported back to the Savage Land because I guess he was out fighting the aliens in their world or something. And then him and Carl become friends, and they try to assault the base of the Petrified Man, but they're not able to. So they ask X-Men if they want to join, and Wolverine and Banshee are like, hell yeah, let's do it. And the Cyclops says, no, Magneto's still around. We got to go help Professor X. That's number one cause. Kazar's like, that's okay. I just felt like I'd ask. So he very kindly, which is new for him from the last time the X-Men ran into him, walks them out so they can catch a cave. They'll get them right out back into Antarctica. But as they're going, they find like snow, and the whole area is kind of like freezing over. And Wolverine's like, and Nightcrawler are playing snowballs and just kind of laughing about it. And Kazar's like, you need to take this more seriously. And Kurt's like, why? It's just snow. And Kazar's like, it never snows in the Savage Land. That means the barrier that's protecting us from Antarctica is breaking, and this will be the end of the Savage Land. The B story focuses on Colossus and his love life again. This time Colossus is, he's all hot and tired because he's from Siberia and it's like a tropical jungle here, and he's having a hard time focusing. But he sees these pretty local ladies with their cool mohawks, and they're attacked by they call it a thunder lizard, but it's like an Allosaurus, Tyrannosaurus Rex type creature. But he can't turn into his armored self because he's too tuckered out from the heat or something. So he battles the dinosaur with just like rocks and axes, and one of the girls gets eaten up real good before he's able to like beat the shit out of the dinosaur and knock it into the water. The women are sad because their friend died, and because there was 3 of them, now there's just 2. So they go and they burn her up, and everyone has a nice thought about it. Then while Colossus is sleeping later that night, he gets awoken by the 2 ladies who survived, and they're like, hey, we're going to go celebrate in the last ceremony. And as they're leaving, they run into Wolverine. And it's like, Wolverine would like to join us? And Wolverine's like, nah, bro, you got it. Because he knows they're just going to go fuck. Anyway, he talks a little bit about his home, and then one of the girls starts to try to kiss him, and he's like, oh, no, I don't know what I should do. It's a pure-hearted Russian like farmer. And then a thunder lizard, the lizard shows back up, like the dinosaur, and it's pissed. But this time, Colossus is able to transform into his metal form, and with this, he's able to beat really murder the dinosaur by. And the girls come up, and he's like, I know I'm a monster. And like, no, you're very handsome. And also, you defeated that monster with your magic powers. We love it. So now we're going to all make out and then have sex. The end. So we continue our journey into the Savage Land with Uncanny number 116. I know I said 117 last week, but I was wrong. Which is classic number 22. And the fight against Grok, the stone man, the sun god, whatever. Kazar is leading the X-Men up onto a mountain of ice where they can overlook this ridiculous-looking, like, alien-looking city that was built by Garok and that's powered by magma that's really destroying the whole ecosystem situation. And while they're up there, they get attacked from the sky by these gliders, these pterodons that are gliding around. And so the X-Men are fight. Cyclops gets hit upside the head and then grabbed. Colossus gets grabbed up. Banshee gets netted, and Kazar gets knocked off the cliff and caught as well. That leaves Nightcrawler, Wolverine, and Storm, and then Zabu. Zabu's about to go nuts, and Wolverine goes up and gives him little pats on the head and rubs his cheek. They're like super best friends. And then Zebu leads the way, and they follow him to the entrance to the city. And once they get in there, they hide out for a little bit and do a little sneaky potamus, knocking out the sentry to get inside. And they go through like the garbage chute, essentially, where there's some dinosaurs that Storm blows away with her water powers. Once they're able to scooch their way in, they find this big kind of Coliseum stadium looking thing. They compare it to the Superdome, which is fun because New Orleans. And then there's the giant rock with the eyes, and then they have the X-Men in there. And Banshee, Cyclops, and Khazar are tied up. And Colossus, who's turned into metal, is being melted, or they're trying to melt him with their magma. And Garok and his like lady friend are watching, and Colossus is like, I don't know how much longer I can hold on to this. Nightcrawler teleports over, opens Cyclops' eyes, like remove whatever thing was guarding him. Like, it looks like a thin piece of cloth, to be completely honest. But at that point, Cyclops is able to release Colossus, who bounces out. Banshee breaks free, and they start fighting, and they fight. And then Storm releases Cyclops, who releases Khazar, and then Cyclops chases after Garok while the rest of the X-Men are fighting like the Garok's minions down. And Garok is complaining because he used so much energy to build this city that he's as frail as a normal human being and that he needs to recharge. At the top of the city, he is able to do that. He like power blasts himself with the power of, I don't know, the sun or something. Doesn't really say. It says he's up there and he's like supercharging. So now he starts using an eye blast, which is the same thing he used to destroy the alien city. But fortunately for Cyclops, he also has Eye Blast, so they Eye Blast power it out. Meanwhile, back in the dome, the X-Men notice that the whole city is starting to collapse, probably because Garok's powers are being completely used up trying to fight Cyclops. And at some point, the dome collapses, and Cyclops and Garok start to fall to their death. Banshee comes along and saves Cyclops, and then Storm goes as hard as she can down to rescue Garok. But right before she's about to grab him, she like has a little panic attack from being buried alive from her phobia, and then gets hit upside the head by like a stone, and then she loses him, which she's very sad about. The rest of X-Men flee the city, and when they get outside, they're worried about Storm, but she busts out of the top and lands a little bit away. And Banshee's like, "Oh, I'm gonna go make sure she's okay." And Wolverine's like, "Hey, bro, just notice that she went to go save a life, and that she's here, and there is only her. So maybe we should just let her chill for a second." The comic informs us that a fortnight has gone by, and the X-Men are ready to leave the Savage Land, which is recovered. It's back to being the good old Savage Land and not covered in ice and stuff. And Wolverine and Zabu are like best friends forever. Lycos is back to normal. He's no longer Soren, and he's like, "Hey, Cyclops, I'm going to stay here. Good luck." And Cyclops says, "Yeah, man, good luck with whatever you're doing." They then get on this little skiff and head out, and Storm's like, "We need to turn around right now," because as soon as they burst out of like this cave, it is like the worst winter storm, the Drake Passage in 100 years. That leaves us at the end of the A story. The B story takes place, I'm assuming, around this like fortnight, and everyone's concerned because Storm is not there, and she left like a note saying she was going to go take some time to herself. And Khazar's like, "We need to go rescue her," and Wolverine's like, "Nah, she's an adult. She can take care of herself. She'll figure it out." So then we get Storm, and she's just off, like, chilling, feeling sad. And while she's diving around, she sees this giant lizard monster, and there's a woman in some sort of, like, spacesuit outfit who's trapped on this giant dinosaur lizard creature, kind of like the one from Jurassic Park World. They have a harpoon. They were trying to hunt this thing, apparently. So Storm goes and finally is able to rescue the woman, but then right as she's getting out, she uses her lightning power to strike the monster, which also strikes her, and so she's, like, unconscious. She wakes up a few days later. And there's this, like, the woman she saved who has in some sort of alien garb is like, "Oh, good, I'm glad you woke up. Come check out my pleasure barge," or whatever it is. And Storm's like, "Wow, this thing's flying." And then she takes off and sees that the barge is being held aloft by, like, a flying wolf monster creature. And then they all become, like, best friends forever. And then they have adventures in this, like, alien world. Because clearly there's, like, some sort of thin membrane that connects worlds and whatever. And so Storm helps out this woman, and they sees how she rules, and they like party together and hang out and having a great time flying around and stuff. And at some point, Aurora finds a statue of the woman and her child and realizes that this woman's kind of like semi-adopting her to be her daughter. And so she goes and like questions her about it, and we find out that the pirate queen or whatever that they've been fighting this whole time is her daughter, and that they had like obviously come to not blows, but they had some disagreements. And then Aurora's sad because it'd be nice to just stay and hang out with like her new mom, but she needs to go back. She has like commitments and friends and things she needs to take care of back on Earth 616. And so then the woman's like, yes, we'll take you back. There's like a place where she can still go. And then he gives her like a brooch, this black brooch, which you see in like it holds her cape together, which is this is like super retconny because that was never explained before. But you can always check up on this woman to make sure she's doing okay, I guess. And then they hug and cry it out, and that's the end of the story. So it's a nice like addition to like what she was doing for like that 2 weeks and like how she kind of mended her heart in terms of like the failure that she had, which is nice. The X-Men here are in quite a lurch, but fortunately for them, there is a Japanese sailing vessel of some sort. They're under like strict government policy or something, as like they have a disagreement before they pick up the X-Men about whether they can or cannot pick them up. And once they get on there, Cyclops is like, so what are you doing around here? We need to contact our, somebody. And the guy's like, I cannot. We will go to Japan and we'll figure it out. We then skip up to Westchester, where Jean is officially leaving and heading off to do something else with her life. We spend some time with Lilandria thinking about being on Earth and about her relationship with Charles and how he's sad and she wishes he could do better. And she goes to talk to him, and he starts regaling his past life. He talks about how him and Moira were in love and they were going to get married, but then he got drafted. And that while he was gone, he got Dear John'd, which for the uninitiated means that Moira was like, all right, well, I'm going to break up with you and go do something else instead. So he was a loss, without love and whatever. So he just wandered around Greece and then headed eventually down to Cairo. And while in Cairo, he's enjoying himself, and he kind of lets his guard down a little bit, and he gets robbed by the future Aurora Monroe, or the present Aurora Monroe, but before she becomes the Storm, which he didn't realize at the time, but he did realize she had some sort of mutant powers. So when he tries to investigate that further, he gets side blasted, and he kind of wakes up, and he's like, oh, it's coming from over there. So he goes to this cafe, and there he meets Farouk. Amal Farouk, who's another telepath, but he's like an evil telepath. So him and Charles exchange words, and Farouk invites him to join his like thieves guild, essentially, which is funny if you know anything about Gambit later on. But no, he's like the master of the underworld here or whatever. Anyway, so Charles challenges him, and they both go into like the astral plane or the telepath plane or whatever you call it. I don't think they actually call it the astral plane here. So they're out, yeah, they're in the astral plane. So in the astral plane, and then they start battling, and they both put on this like fancy armor. Charles looks like a gladiator. If you've seen the cartoon version, you've seen this, but the other guy looks kind of like more spacey kind of combat. They punch with psychic swords and shields, and the guy starts blasting Charles, and he starts to feel like he's actually being burned on his back. And the Farouk mentions that anything that happens in the astral plane with this telepathic battle happens in the real world, and that he's gonna kill him. It'll be an instant psychological death. And once Charles realizes what's going on, he's like, all right, I gotta like take this more serious. I can't just treat this like a normal physical battle. So Farouk turns into some crazy monster and grabs Charles, and Charles lets his defenses down because he's focusing all his power on like one decisive kind of like laser strike into Farouk's brain. And then we get a fun scene where it's Charles on one side of the room and Farouk's on the other side, and they're sitting there quietly, and then Farouk falls over and Charles walks out the door. And he's like, well, that was interesting. From there, he heads eastward, and finally in Tibet, he runs into Lucifer, which is where he loses the loss of his legs. And if you were following any of my stuff, we talk about Lucifer a bit with the Uncanny X-Men. That situation finally gets like resolved back in like Uncanny X-Men number 30-something or 40-something. At this point, Lilandria's like, hey, you should come with me into space. There's no reason for you to be here anymore. He's like, no, this is my home. And she's like, you have no home here anymore. The X-Men are dead, and there's nothing tying you here. And he's like, all right, let's do it. I'll go wherever you lead me. So this is where Charles heads into space. Then we get a couple epilogues for the A-plot. Jean is at the airport getting ready to fly off, and she runs into Misty Knight. Misty Knight's going to Japan to help Colleen with some old bullshit. And her and Jean hug it out, and then she takes off. Second epilogue is with Wolverine. He's, pining over Jean and being sad that she's dead, even though Cyclops isn't really sad. But there's a reason Cyclops isn't super sad, is because we'll find out later. But as the X-Men are kind of training, Nightcrawler, who's always in for a good time, tries to play a prank on Wolverine. Wolverine almost stabs him, and then him and Cyclops look at each other, and Nightcrawler's like, holy shit, man. And Wolverine's like, sorry, I was thinking about somebody else. And Storm's like, there's a storm coming, and Cyclops is like, it's already here. Anyway, so the B-plot is during this storm, or the previous storm, Nightcrawler's like, Storm, can you do anything about this? And she's like, I am doing something about it. Calm the fuck down. Anyway, this woman, Aiko, falls into the water outside, so Nightcrawler jumps out to save her. They both end up on this deserted island. Nightcrawler goes around. He finds a plane from Madapur, which will come up later, and he finds some clothes in there and a flare gun and some other cool stuff. And when he hops out, he sees this kind of like crazy monster guy, and so he fights him and beats him up. And on his belt, he has this big fucking like silver belt. Is like the mountain in the middle of the island? So he's like, all right, I guess I gotta go there. So he heads there, and once inside, it's like a volcano, right? So it's got a big molten core in the middle and all this stuff. He sees Aiko being dragged to this altar to be sacrificed by this priest. So of course Nightcrawler steps in, punches him real good, beats up the other guys, the guards, and is about to rescue Aiko when the guy uses some sort of like hypnotizing magic on him. And so Nightcrawler like falls over and is lying next to sexy Aiko. Right before the guy's supposed to sacrifice both of them, they teleport out of there, and then Nightcrawler, like, they're up at the top of the mountain, and he talks to her about, he's like, oh good thing I had that X-Men training. Otherwise that would have been done for, and I gotta stop being such a swashbuckler and use my head a little bit more. So he gets the flare, sends the flare up, they get like a lightning blast from Storm indicating that they're found, and then the girl's like hugging on him and like kissing on him. And she's like, oh, what are we going to do while we wait, my handsome hero? And he's like, oh, we'll think of something. Because they fuck. Good stuff. When the X-Men finally arrive in Japan, they get quite the surprise. There's a giant firestorm going on, and there's jets flying by, and all their friends from the ship are like, oh, ruh-roh. Cyclops wants to be landed so that they can help out, but the ship captain is like, nah, man, there's so much wreckage, we can't do that. So Nightcrawler hops over, makes sure it's all clear, and then the flyers fly him over. They work their way over to Yoshida, and we find out that Wolverine can speak fluent Japanese, and that Cyclops is stunned, but for like the 45th time, Wolverine's like, well, you never asked, so that's why you don't know shit. Meanwhile, in space, Lilandra and Charles are watching the Earth, getting ready to head out to her home planet. Also, cut away into Kyranos, Greece, where Jean is hanging out, having a vacation. All her stuff got stolen by some dumb kids, and so she meets this nice man, Nico, who is not all that he seems to be. Back to Japan. The X-Men sneak into the Yoshida estate. There's lots of government officials and stuff, and Sunfire approaches them and is about to start a battle when Misty Knight, who got hired to be a guard for Colleen Wing, who apparently is related to the she's related to somebody, and which makes her a daimyo. Sure, why not? We also see some shady guys kind of scoping out the place. Cyclops goes to call Jean Grey and interrupts Misty Knight, who's talking to her boyfriend, Iron Fist, so he's getting around, obviously. Cyclops calls, all the numbers have been turned off, and he's concerned, but Banshee's like, hey, we gotta go figure this out, and then we can go check it out. Meanwhile, Wolverine's wandering around on his own, and he runs into Mariko, the actual true love of his life, who's this Japanese Sunfire's sister or cousin or something. Anyway, while they're chit-chatting and flirting, there's an earthquake, so Wolverine rescues her and then runs to the rest of the X-Men. And then they get attacked by the Mandroids. Now, the Mandroids are an old Avengers enemy that were designed specifically to fight the Avengers, which makes them very difficult. And they were also designed to fight Sunfire, so he's virtually worthless against them. Unfortunately for the Mandroids, the X-Men are here, and they were not programmed to fight him, so they beat the shit out of him, drive them all back, destroy them all. And then the two guys who brought them over here in the first place in the truck get stopped by Colossus. Well, everyone's celebrating, and Sunfire's licking his wounds and being upset that the guy Jen showed him up. We get a holographic projection from Magnum Force, or Moses Magnum, who can, I guess he creates earthquakes, because one of the things about all these earthquakes is causing the firestorm and everything else is that they're not natural. And he tells the Prime Minister he has 24 hours to declare him the king of Japan or whatever, or he'll sink all of Japan. The B story here is Jean's. It follows Jean's vacation in Kyranos, and we learn that this Nikos guy that she met is actually Mastermind, and this is a retcon of his earlier administrations to try to get Jean Grey to be the Black Queen and to rule with him in the Hellfire Club. And so they go on adventures, and she kisses him and feels bad about it, and then he's like, you should loosen up, and they have a little party, and then she, her shattered psyche of being the actual Phoenix, not actually Jean Grey, starts to really come through. And then Mastermind is ooh, delightful. This was easier than I thought. Continuing our X journey through Japan, we start with the Roro holding on to Nightcrawler and flying him over to Moses Magnum's secret base, which is inside some sort of volcano kind of looking thing. Anyway, Nightcrawler gets in there, beats up some guards, and then he remembers the debrief that we had off screen before this. And all the X-Men are standing around talking to Colleen's grandfather, and he's explaining that the guy could definitely sink Japan with his powers, and he recalls that Moses Magnum has been dead twice, and he somehow survived. The last time being in Spider-Man, Giant-Size Spider-Man, and then before that in Power Man Annual. And then the X-Men are like, all right, we got a plan. So we go back to Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler reports in to Misty Knight that he's there, and then Aurora and Sean start making a big fuss about the whole place, kind of distract everybody. Well, Nightcrawler uses his ability to hide in the shadows to sneak down to find a place where he's going to meet up with Cyclops, Colossus, Wolverine, and Sunfire, who are digging a tunnel under the ocean with the Cyber Blast or the Optic Blast and Sunfire's fire powers, and it's super hot, and they don't want to run out of oxygen because they're like under the ground and there's not enough oxygen. Nightcrawler eventually gets them to where they need to go so they don't pop up in the ocean, and as soon as they come forward, Colossus is like, where's Nightcrawler? And then Moses Magnum just knocks him the fuck out of the whole fucking base almost and into the ocean, but then he comes crawling back. Meanwhile, Wolverine, Cyclops, and Sunfire are fighting Moses, and he has some crazy superpowers. He's about to peace out and let his like mandroids take care of business when Colossus comes charging back and beats the shit out of him. He runs away. Banshee tries to chase after him, and then based on some of the stuff that Moses was saying about how he's using like a beam or a ray to cause like the earthquakes, he's like, I got an idea. I can counteract it with my own powers. So he flies out. Moses then recalls how he got these powers and what happened in Power Man Annual 1, I guess. He was like a weapons merchant, kind of like Tony Stark before he became Iron Man, and he was trying to drill to the center of the earth or something, and then he collapsed and fell all the way down, and rubble fell on top of him. He was, quote-unquote, rescued by Apocalypse, apparently, who looks real dumb in this like classic version. Kind of like retcon story, but he essentially promises Moses Magnum he's going to give him a bunch of power, and he can serve Apocalypse, or he can send him back to the rebels. So he's like, I guess no other choice. So Moses Magnum and Banshee battle out their frequency battle, and instead of sending the ray to start an earthquake in Japan, it blows up his base. And then we get like a couple days later or a full day later, Misty Knight, Colleen Wing, and the Japanese Air Force are looking for the X-Men, and they find Sunfire, who leads them back to the X-Men. Sean is like knocked the fuck out, but everyone else survived. They happen to like get out of there right before it blew up. We then get like some more retcon story where Colleen and Cyclops are kind of like into each other because she's a redhead and he's got a type. And then Misty Knight's like, oh girl, what, you gotta be careful, what about him and Jean? And it's like, bro, they still think Jean Grey is dead and you haven't said shit. What the fuck's wrong with you? You haven't brought this up at all. Like, maybe it just hasn't come up. Anyway, we then get back to the end of the original story, which is after Banshee's recovers from like a 3-day coma or whatever, or 10 days later, if he gets out of the hospital. He's sad because none of the X-Men are there when he got released, even though the doctor promised that they were all hanging out the entire time in the waiting room. And Banshee comes in, he's all sad-eponymous, and then they're like, Merry Christmas, and he realizes, oh, they came back to throw him a big party. And Aurora's got some sexy yukata on, and you know, she's like giving smooches to her new family, like Colossus and Nightcrawler. And then Wolverine's like, ooh, Mariko, I'm gonna be back, I'll see you later, Aurora. Meanwhile, out in Scotland, Jean Grey shows up from her like Greek adventures with Mastermind, and Moira, Lorna, Alex, and Jamie, who's Multiple Man, are there to greet her, and they're going to have a grand old Christmas party. And then that boat captain who sold or rented his boat to the X-Men like a long time ago, he's still butthurt about it being destroyed, so he's coming in to what's it called, Mur Island research facility to like cause problems, and then he runs into Mutant X. Dun dun dun. So the B story is Wolverine. He's out somewhere causing problems. He's blowing up something. Some sort of something for the Canadian military. Anyway, he blows it up, but it's a short fuse, so he gets all burnt up, and he's like, fuck. And so he starts walking out of there, and then there's some hunter who's just out in the Canadian wild, and he starts hunting Wolverine like he's Sasquatch or the Yeti or something. And then we just get Wolverine being like, God, that guy's so fucking loud. I wish he would stop bothering me. It's cold. It's hard enough for my healing factor to heal up all this fucking frostbite. And then the hunter's like, oh, I used to fish, and then I hunted deer, and I love dominating nature. And he's like, I'm going to shoot that fucking eagle in the sky. And then Wolverine is like, oh, that beautiful eagle, it's so free. And then he gets attacked by a bear, and he fucks that bear up. And then he's like, oh, that motherfucker, he's still chasing after me. And then the hunter guy tries to shoot Wolverine with like a bow and arrow, even though he just had a rifle. I guess he still has the rifle. And then Wolverine takes the arrow, he catches it mid-flight and throws it back at him, and it seems like he hits him in the leg, maybe? And then Wolverine stalks off. The end. So what to do with Alpha Flight? The X-Men that are left, which is Storm, Cyclops, and Colossus, they bust into some sort of carnival expo center. What is this place? Calgary Stampede. Oh, it's like a stadium. Anyway, once they get there, Shaman starts creating this ridiculous storm that's going to get them in a lot of trouble. We get a recap of everything that occurred in the previous issue, and then the heads of the Canadian government here, like the guy who's in charge of Department H and one of the what's this guy? He's like a attorney for something. They start getting into a huge argument, and then the representative, the diplomat from Japan, comes in and he's like, "You need to release the X-Men right now. They are they are heroes in Japan, and you shot down one of our planes. This caused a lot of problems." And this other diplomat starts arguing with him, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, this is getting completely out of control. We're causing all these problems." Meanwhile, back at the Calgary Stampede Stadium, the X-Men find Wolverine and Nightcrawler tied up and knocked out, and then Alpha Flight's there, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna fight, and we're gonna be fight." And then Colleen, Banshee, and Misty Knight, they show up at the stadium as well, but they're not able to get in. There's some sort of invisible force field. Colossus notices that what's his name, North Star, is sneaking up on Cyclops, and then creates like he like stamps the ground and creates like a shockwave. So then the fight begins, and then we find out Wolverine and Nightcrawler were just pretending to be unconscious. Oh, they got him. And so we fight. Shaman turns some of these like little totems into monsters to fight. North Star and Aurora are very fast, and so Nightcrawler starts chasing Aurora, and she's zooming around, flying. Storm's fighting who is this, like the owl woman? It's like, I don't remember her name. But they're flying around, fighting. Wolverine's fighting. The X-Men are kind of getting beat up because they're not using teamwork like Alpha Flight does. Sasquatch is fighting Colossus. Cyclops gets knocked upside the head by North Star, I think. Meanwhile, back at the embassy, the American ambassador has joined the Japanese ambassador, and they're like really reaming it into Canada, having a real tough talk with all of them. The X-Men start to kind of win the battle, and Nightcrawler gets a smooch from Aurora, despite her protestations. And finally, the storm gets so out of control that Storm needs to do something about it. So she captures, being the most powerful X-Men and the best, she uses her cloak to capture the owl, the snow owl lady, tosses it to the ground, and then flies up in the middle of the storm and spreads it out over like the whole northern hemisphere, essentially, instead of being concentrated in Canada, limiting its damage. And then when she lands, she's like, "Man, I'm gonna tuck it out." North Star runs up and like smacks her in the back of the head, so Cyclops whacks him right in the face with his optic blast, and he's about to hit him again when Wolverine stops him. He's like, "Hey man, chill, we don't kill people." And Cyclops is like, "I thought you loved killing people," and Wolverine's like, time and place. Anyway, I'm going to give myself up to these guys in this battle. At that point, Sean and Colleen and Misty are able to get through, and Wolverine surrenders himself, gets in the back of an armored vehicle, and gets taken off. The rest of the X-Men get put on a plane and flown out of Canada. And then while they're on that plane, Cyclops and the rest of them start discussing how they're going to sneak back into Canada, and they're going to rescue Wolverine because, leave no man behind. And the Wolverine's like, "Why don't you just chill out?" And he's like, "What?" The fuck you get here? And he's like, "Nothing can hold the Wolverine." Fair enough. In the epilogue, the Alpha Flight's like, "Hey, what happened to this guy?" And it's like, "Oh, he got tied up. Oh, Wolverine busted out of this thing and escaped. Let's go get him. We can't get him. He's in America, blah, blah, blah." And then like the Alpha Flight commander or whatever is like summons Vindicator and is like, "All right, ignore Wolverine, whatever, just let him do whatever he wants. And you guys are in trouble. He caused a lot of problems." The B story is kind of silly. It's this guy at like a factory, and he finds this like strange monster. Meanwhile, Cyclops is with Wolverine and Jean Grey like at a burger joint, hanging out, and Wolverine's trying to get in Jean's pants, and she's like, "Nah, I'm not having any part of that." And then she senses the issue at the factory, so they all head over there. Wolverine and Jean fall down and get attacked by these monsters, and the more they attack them, the more they multiply. So Jean's using her telekinetic powers. Eventually, they kind of lure them all into like this central area where there's like an explosion, and Wolverine and Jean are getting very close, like very chummy. And he's loving it. And she's like, "This is not the time to replace for any of this stuff." And he's like, "Nah, baby, this is great." Eventually, she gets the word that the whole factory has been cleared out, and so they can blow like the factory up and burn all these things to death, which they do. And then they hop out. And then Cyclops runs up and he's like, "Jean, are you okay? Was it horrible?" And then they look at each other, and Wolverine says, "That's the best time I've had in months." What a perv. All right, so the X-Men are finally ready to leave Japan, and that they do. But while they're having their exploits in Japan, they get it spied on by the Canadian government, led by Vindicator, who is Mick something. I can't remember what his name is. But he's talking to some government official and saying, "Nah, man, one guy's like, go get Wolverine." He's like, "We can't get Wolverine. He resigned." He's like, "No, that's why we created Alpha Flight." So then we finally meet the members of Alpha Flight. There's John Paul, who's North Star, and his sister Aurora, Jean Marie. There's Shaman, who is, I can't remember his name. There's Snowbird, she's some blonde chick, and then there's Sasquatch, who right now is this Dr. Langwagowski. We don't have Puck yet. Puck's the best member of Alpha Flight. We'll get to him eventually, I'm sure. Anyway, so Vindicator calls his wife, who we learn later they had like an interesting relationship between the three of them, and this is kind of where the fetish that Wolverine has for redheads comes from, but it doesn't get into it right here. All right, so then they head off. Then we switch over to Mer Island. Jean's running around as Phoenix. I think this is a classic addition, and because it's a lot more foreshadowing that Phoenix and Jean are not the same person, which was like a total retcon later on, but whatever. We're going to roll with it because we're reading through these classic ones. But Moira and them just talk about, she misses Banshee, and Jean just kind of like regurgitates the same stuff about, "I don't know who I am. I feel like I was reborn. I feel like I'm the same person. I'm not, blah, blah, blah." It's all very boring at this point. It was interesting the first time. Anyway, Shiro is like, "All right, Gaijin, get the fuck out of my country. Thanks for coming to help." And Cyclops and him shake it out. And then Mariko gets a surprise visit by Wolverine and gives him a chrysanthemum, which is like a beautiful flower. And she's like, "Oh, it's as beautiful, but not as beautiful as you, Mr. Logan." Or Wolverine. And then this is where he's like, "Call me Logan." So this is like I think this is officially when it first comes up. Anyway, so they're flying, and as they get across the Rocky Mountains, there's disturbance in the force, like the weather force. And even Storm can't deal with it, because it's being controlled by, I think that's one of Shaman's capabilities. So they're forced to land. When they land, Vindicator's there, and then they're like, "Whatever, fucking just keep going." But then Sasquatch grabs the plane and chucks it and like destroys the plane. Storm causes like a storm surge so that they're able to like sneak off, and they head into Calgary, Alberta. And while they're out there, they're kind of, hanging out, doing whatever. Nightcrawler's off on his own, kind of like trying to figure out what's going on. And he gets attacked by North Star and Aurora, who they like hold hands and can do like light magic, light powers or something. It's something like that. I can't remember. Banshee's thinking about how he might be like done being Banshee because he can't use his powers anymore. And then he's trying to get Aurora to dress like not so like a tribal priestess so that they're harder to find. Vindicator is though, North Star and Aurora are mutants. And so Vindicator is able to use whatever like mutant tracking capabilities they have to track down Banshee and Storm. Banshee tries to attack him, but then he falls over, and Vindicator's like, "You okay?" And then Aurora comes out, sees this, and is like, "Fuck you," and like blasts him out of there. And so he starts flying off. Cyclops and Colossus are like, "What's that guy again?" And then Wolverine's like off in his zone, just like being like, "Oh, some things change and some things never change." And then Sasquatch pops around from a corner and beats the shit out of him, knocking him out and dragging him off. And the Cyclops is like, "These motherfuckers are gonna pay." So the B story is just like it's like a story told by Banshee and Wolverine. They both ended up in the same place in Canada. So Wolverine's out there just running a scam with like his lady friend who owns this bar. And then Banshee just happened to be there because at the time, this is like 20 years ago, he was working for Interpol. And while he was working for Interpol, he was tracking down these like criminals into Canada, into this part of Canada. And they were meeting at this bar. And Sean was trying to figure out a way to get them distracted, but thank goodness Wolverine was causing all the distraction he needed. So Wolverine he was arm wrestling dudes and like making a big fuss, and there's like this big strong guy, and then he arm wrestled him, and then they started fighting, and then his handler, who was like handling the exchange, the illegal exchange, he wandered off. And so then at that point Sean's like, come here, and summoned the Mountie police force in Canada, and they came and grabbed the criminals, and they peace out. And it was all very secretive, and no one knew what happened. Meanwhile, Wolverine beats the crap out of this big dude, and they win a bunch of money, and everyone wins. And then they're like, yeah, I used to think you government guys were pieces of shit, but then I joined the government. And Sean's like, yeah, I thought you rogue guys who were like doing cowboy stuff were pieces of shit, but now that's what I'm doing, so that's cool. And then Cyclops makes some comment. He's like, wow, it's so great that two guys could get out of their shell and learn how to work as a team and not be so like uptight. And they both and then everyone laughs at him and makes fun of him because that's what he does. All right, so we finished up the Phoenix Saga with X-Men Annual number 3, which is a king-size, delightful experience where we head into the Imperium and deal with Archon. Archon's a character from, I think, mostly the Avengers at this point. So the episode starts off, there's just some old people hanging out in New York when Archon shows up with all his lightning power glory, and he's an Imperium, which makes him super strong and big and powerful and from a place in the universe somewhere, and he uses lightning powers. Anyway, he comes stomping off to the Avengers manor looking for Thor, and Jarvis there, despite all the threats Archon gives him, is like, no, Thor actually at this point in time is not a member of the Avengers full time, and he's gone. I have no idea where he's at, so you can't do anything about it. Meanwhile, the X-Men are in the danger room fighting and practicing. Sean at this point is just kind of leading them or helping out since he cannot use his powers. Storm gets caught up in like a storm, freaks out, blows up. There's like a huge blow up, which sends this shard of glass flying into the control room, the danger room, which sets everything off and doesn't allow Sean to turn everything off. So then the X-Men fight the danger room for a while, and eventually Cyclops is able to use the emergency turn off inside, which causes a huge problem. Storm goes storming off because she's upset. Cyclops tries to talk to her and says, hey, it's all good. Don't worry about it. But she heads off to her place by herself, and then she gets jumped by Akron. She blows him through the wall. Cyclops and Sean are just chit-chatting, and so they get involved. And then Cyclops knocks Archon out into the water where Colossus is just standing around almost naked. And they fight. They punch around some more. The rest of the X-Men get involved. And eventually Storm gets hit with one of Archon's like trans-dimensional teleportation lightning bolts. The X-Men are furious, thinking that she's dead, and they beat him up and get him to a point where Wolverine could kill him at any point. Then Cyclops notices, or kind of like goes through his stuff and is like, all right, so these yellow lightning bolts are probably going to transport us to another place. Sean, you wait here. And so they all transport to the Imperium capital world, where there's a giant army and battles commence. That's most of this issue. It's just fighting. It's a lot of good fighting. The Vizier kind of stalks off, and Nightcrawler follows after him to try to find Aurora. But meanwhile, the X-Men are just fight. They push out. They fight some more. They run into another army. It's like out of the frying pan into the fire. And the fighting is just Colossus, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler, or not even Nightcrawler, and Cyclops are just beating the shit out of all these Imperium and all their stuff. While Nightcrawler follows the Vizier to a temple. And in the temple, Aurora's dressed up very oddly, and she's willing to sacrifice herself for the planet. And then Nightcrawler tries to confront her, and she blasts him. Meanwhile, Wolverine and the X-Men see the blast from the temple, and so they're like, oh, we gotta fight our way over there. And then Colossus rides in on like a dragon horse. And Cyclops is like, the fuck you get that from? And he's like, oh, they attacked me, so I stole one. And so they ride off to the temple. When they get there to find Aurora doing some lightning magic, and they find out that, so finally, Archon, who's like, man, you should just told us you need some help. Maybe we could have helped you. And he's like, that is not the way of my people. But I'll explain to you now. So the world has these rings that go around it, and they got to be charged. And that's when they failed. They went to get Thor to sacrifice him, I guess. But then Iron Man and Thor found a way. They created a device where Thor could charge it, and it kept the lights going on for a while now. But then a few weeks ago, it started to die again, and they couldn't get Thor because Thor's off doing Thor shit. So they grabbed Aurora, and she was going to sacrifice herself, right? But then Cyclops is like, hey, Wolverine and Nightcrawler, you guys are good at electronics and fixing stuff. How about you change that device so it can take optic blasts? Why would they be able to do that? And then Wolverine's like, hey, man, I tinker with stuff, but this seems way out of my league. And Cyclops is like, just do it. And so they do. So meanwhile, this year is so ridiculous. Colossus holds Storm up. She summons all her power. Colossus grounds her, and then she shoots it at Cyclops, which they've done something like this before, where he like charged up using other people's powers, like Havoc or whatever. That's how they took care of Krakoa, actually. And so he's charging up, and they make the comment that like normally his power is fueled by the sun, but it's using lightning energy is like putting low grade fuel into like a high octane machine or whatever. Anyway, finally Nightcrawler and Wolverine are able to adapt the machine without any testing or anything so that it can take optic blast, and Cyclops blasts it, which causes this giant explosion, recharges the sun, but destroys the whole mountain that the temple's on. And so the Archon's guard rolls up and like, no, everyone's dead. And then Archon's like, I'm alive, and so is everyone else. We're fine. So then after, quote, the traditional round of feasts and royal celebrations, Archon invites the X-Men to join him. And they're like, no, we got to get back home. We have people that depend on us. And he's like, all right, farewell, friends, until we meet again. And that's the issue. It's super ridiculous. But it was fun. It was just dumb fun. It's so dumb. But that wraps up the Phoenix Saga. And yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. It really, the Phoenix Saga is like the first little bit, and then it's just like Phoenix related stuff and then non-Phoenix related stuff. But again, I'm kind of going by the pack, these X-Men packs I torrented off offline to determine the different arcs. And yeah, that's the Phoenix Saga. Next up is going to be Murder World, which is going to be much shorter, and we'll go on from there, see what's going on. But there's a lot of stuff building up, a lot of stuff growing, and it only gets more crazy the further on we go. So thanks for indulging me, and I hope you all have a good time. Go ahead, like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I will catch you guys later.